The Villa Venice was packed on November 26, 1962. The suburban Chicago nightclub, secretly owned by Sam Giancana through a labyrinth of front companies, was hosting the hottest show in America. The Rat Pack had come to town. Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, and Sammy Davis Jr. performing together for 2 weeks. Every night sold out. Every table filled with Chicago's elite celebrities. And of course, the men who really ran the city. Dean Martin stood center stage, a tumbler of what everyone assumed was whiskey in his hand. It was actually apple juice. Dean's drunk persona was an act, carefully cultivated, brilliantly executed. But tonight, the act would be tested in a way Dean never anticipated. He was in the middle of his comedy routine, loose and casual, making it look easy the way he always did. "You know," Dean said, swirling his glass, "I love Chicago. Beautiful city, great food, and the business community here is so direct. You ask a guy for a loan, he doesn't mess around with paperwork. He just tells you exactly when you're going to pay it back and exactly what happens if you don't." The audience laughed. It was a gentle joke, the kind of mob humor that everyone in Vegas and Chicago was used to. Entertainers walked a fine line, acknowledging the mob's presence without directly insulting anyone. It was part of the game. Dean had been playing this game for years. I mean, the bankers here, they really take their work seriously. They'll break your legs to prove a point about fiscal responsibility. More laughter. Dean took a sip of his apple juice, smiled that famous Dean Martin smile, and continued with his set. He didn't notice a man in the back booth, sitting in shadow, whose expression hadn't changed at all. Sam Giancana wasn't laughing. The man who owned Chicago. Sam Giancana wasn't just another mobster. He wasn't muscle. He wasn't some mid-level captain trying to make a name. Sam Giancana was the boss of the Chicago outfit, one of the most powerful crime syndicates in America. He controlled gambling, prostitution, loan sharking, and labor unions across the Midwest. Politicians took his calls. Businessmen paid him tribute. Law enforcement knew his name and mostly tried to work around him. Giancana was 54 years old, 5'7", with slick back hair and eyes that never seemed to blink. People who met him described the same thing. There was something reptilian about Sam Giancana, something cold. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. When Giancana spoke, people listened because not listening meant disappearing. But Giancana was also different from the old guard mobsters. He understood publicity. He understood image. He cultivated relationships with entertainers because entertainers gave him legitimacy. When Frank Sinatra called him a friend, when Dean Martin performed at his club, when celebrities were photographed at his establishments, it softened his image. It made him seem less like a murderer and more like a colorful character. That's why the Villa Venice existed. Giancana had arranged for the Rat Pack to perform there, doing Sinatra a favor that Sinatra was repaying. The shows were technically free. Patrons only had to pay for dinner. But those dinner prices were astronomical, and everyone knew where the money was really going. It was a way to funnel cash into Giancana's pockets while giving him the prestige of hosting America's biggest stars. Giancana had invested a lot in this arrangement. He'd spent money, called in favors, created this whole elaborate setup. And now Dean Martin was on stage making jokes about Chicago bankers breaking legs, jokes about loan sharks, jokes that made Giancana's world seem ridiculous, jokes that made his business, his life's work, his source of power, sound like a punchline. The audience was laughing with Dean. That meant they were laughing at Giancana. And Sam Giancana did not get laughed at. Not in his city. Not in his club. Not when he was sitting 20 feet away in the back booth. Giancana leaned over to Chuck English, one of his top enforcers. "Get Dean Martin," he said quietly, "after the show. Bring him to the back room. We need to have a conversation." Chuck nodded. He'd been with Giancana long enough to know that tone. This wasn't a social call. This was business. And the business was going to be unpleasant. The message. Dean finished his set to massive applause. He bowed, waved, walked off stage with that casual swagger that made everything look effortless. He was heading to his dressing room, ready to change and relax before the next show, when 3 men in dark suits stepped into his path. Mr. Martin, the lead one, said, "Chuck English." Dean recognized him. Everyone in entertainment recognized Giancana's top guys. Mr. Giancana would like a word. Dean stopped. He looked at the three men, all bigger than him, all serious, all positioned in a way that made it clear this wasn't optional. Other performers might have panicked. Other entertainers might have started stammering apologies, trying to figure out what they'd done wrong, desperately attempting to smooth things over before they even knew what the problem was. Dean took a sip from his glass of apple juice. "Now?" he asked, his voice completely relaxed. "Now," Chuck confirmed. "All right," Dean said with a slight shrug. "Lead the way." They walked through the back corridors of the Villa Venice, away from the public areas, away from the music and laughter, into the quiet parts of the building where business got handled. Dean followed calmly, like he was heading to a business meeting, not a potential confrontation with one of the most dangerous men in America. They reached the door. Chuck knocked twice, then opened it. Inside was a small private room, expensive furniture, dim lighting, and Sam Giancana, sitting behind a desk, hands folded, face expressionless. "Mr. Martin," Giancana said, "come in. Sit down." Dean walked in. He didn't hesitate. He didn't look nervous. He sat in the chair across from Giancana, crossed his legs, and waited. The three enforcers stood by the door. The message was clear. Dean wasn't leaving until this conversation was over. "You had a funny set tonight," Giancana said. His voice was neutral, giving nothing away. "Thanks," Dean replied. Audience seemed to enjoy it. "Yeah, they did," Giancana agreed. "Lots of jokes about Chicago, about our business practices, about bankers who break legs." There it was, the reason for the meeting. Dean had crossed a line. The question now was what happened next. Most entertainers would have started apologizing immediately, would have explained they didn't mean anything by it, would have begged for forgiveness, would have promised never to make those kinds of jokes again. Fear would have poured out of them because everyone knew what Sam Giancana could do. Dean took another sip of his apple juice. "Yeah," he said simply, "that's the bit." Giancana's eyes narrowed slightly. "The bit? The bit," Dean repeated. "I do jokes about mob stuff. Always have. It's part of the act. People expect it. It's funny because everyone knows it's true, but nobody talks about it. So when someone does talk about it, there's a release. That's comedy." He said it like he was explaining a golf swing. Casual, educational, completely unbothered by the fact that he was sitting across from a man who'd ordered dozens of murders. "You think my life is funny?" Giancana asked. The temperature in the room dropped. This was a threat. This was where Giancana was supposed to make Dean understand how serious this was. Dean looked at Giancana for a long moment. Then he smiled. Not a nervous smile. Not a placating smile. A genuine Dean Martin smile. Warm and relaxed. "Sam," Dean said, and the use of the first name made Chuck English tense up. Nobody called Giancana Sam, unless they were very close or very stupid. "My whole life is funny. Your life is funny. Every life is funny if you look at it right. That's what I do. I find the funny parts and I point them out. I'm not trying to insult you. I'm not trying to make you look bad. I'm just doing my job." "Your job," Giancana repeated slowly. "My job," Dean confirmed. "You know what my job is? I make people laugh. That's it. That's the whole thing. I get on stage and for an hour, I help people forget their problems. I help them relax. I help them have a good time. And part of that is making jokes about stuff everyone knows but doesn't say." Dean leaned forward slightly. Not aggressive, just conversational. "You know what your job is, Sam? You run a business. You make money. You provide services. You solve problems. Different methods than a regular businessman, sure, but same basic principle. And part of your job, the way I see it, is maintaining respect, maintaining fear, making sure people know you're not someone to mess with." Giancana said nothing. He was listening. "So here's the thing," Dean continued. "If you threaten me right now, if you hurt me, if you make me change my act, you prove that jokes can hurt you. You prove that words have power over you. You prove that some drunk comedian with a microphone can get under your skin. Dean took another sip. But if you don't do anything, if you just let me keep making my jokes, then what? Then it's just entertainment. It's just Dean Martin being Dean Martin. Nobody thinks less of you. Nobody loses respect for you. Because everybody knows the difference between a comedy routine and real disrespect. The room was silent. Chuck English and the other enforcers were watching their boss, waiting for a signal, waiting to see if they needed to teach Dean Martin a lesson about respect. Why Dean wasn't afraid. Most people didn't understand Dean Martin. They saw the drunk act, the casual persona, the guy who seemed to coast through life on charm and talent without ever breaking a sweat. They thought he was simple, easygoing, maybe a little dumb. They were wrong. Dean Martin was one of the smartest performers in show business. He'd grown up poor in Steubenville, Ohio, the son of Italian immigrants. He'd worked as a bootlegger, a car dealer, a boxer. He'd seen violence. He'd seen corruption. He understood how power worked long before he became famous. When Dean looked at Sam Giancana, he didn't see a scary mobster. He saw a businessman with different methods. Sure, more violent methods, but still, at the core, someone operating by rational principles. Someone who made calculated decisions based on costs and benefits. Dean had calculated the situation in seconds. If Giancana hurt him, it would create massive problems. The press would explode. The FBI, which was already investigating Giancana, would intensify their scrutiny. Frank Sinatra would be furious because Dean was his friend, and any attack on Dean would damage the careful relationship Sinatra had built with Giancana. Other entertainers would refuse to work at any Giancana-connected venue. The cost of hurting Dean Martin far outweighed any benefit. But Dean also understood something else, something deeper. Giancana's power came from fear, yes, but it also came from a certain code, a certain rationality. You didn't kill people for no reason. You didn't hurt people unless they genuinely wronged you. Random violence was bad for business. It attracted attention. It made you unpredictable. And unpredictable was dangerous in Giancana's world. So Dean bet everything on Giancana being rational. On Giancana understanding that jokes from a comedian weren't worth the cost of retaliation. But there was something else in Dean's calm. Something that went beyond calculation. Dean Martin genuinely didn't care that much. Not about threats. Not about violence. Not about dying, really. He'd lived a full life. He'd achieved more than most people ever would. He wasn't going to spend his remaining years afraid of men like Sam Giancana. That fearlessness wasn't bravado. It wasn't stupidity. It was genuine indifference to threats. And that indifference was visible in every relaxed line of his body, every casual sip of his drink, every easy word. And it was starting to unnerve Sam Giancana. When calm becomes terrifying, Giancana was used to fear. He built his entire empire on fear. When he threatened someone, they broke. They begged. They promised anything. They showed him that they understood he had the power to destroy them. Dean Martin was showing none of that. Dean sat across from him completely relaxed, making logical arguments about comedy and business, as if they were colleagues discussing a contract dispute. There was no fear in his eyes, no nervousness in his voice, no desperation in his posture. It was wrong. It violated everything Giancana understood about power dynamics. When the powerful man threatens, the weak man submits. That's how it worked. That's how it always worked. Except Dean Martin wasn't submitting. He wasn't even acknowledging that he was in danger. "You're not worried," Giancana said. It wasn't a question. It was an observation. "About what?" Dean asked. "About what I might do to you." Dean considered this. "Sam, if you were going to do something to me, you'd have done it already. You're a busy man. You don't waste time with long conversations before you hurt someone. The fact that we're sitting here talking means you're thinking about this, weighing your options, trying to figure out the smart play." He smiled. "And the smart play is to let me keep doing my job while you keep doing yours. We're not enemies. I'm not trying to undermine you. I'm just trying to make people laugh." and you're trying to make money. Those things don't have to conflict. Giancana stared at him. Then, slowly, something happened. His expression changed. Not to anger, not to frustration, to something that might have been respect, or maybe fascination. "You're an interesting guy, Dean," Giancana said slowly. "I'm a simple guy," Dean corrected. "I like singing. I like jokes. I like having a drink and not thinking too hard about complicated stuff. But I've been around enough to know when someone's bluffing and when someone's serious. And I've been around enough to know that you didn't get where you are by making stupid decisions." He leaned back. "Hurting me would be a stupid decision. You know it. I know it. So why don't we skip the part where you try to scare me and I pretend to be scared and just agree that we're both going to keep doing what we do?" The silence stretched out. Chuck English was watching his boss carefully. This conversation had not gone the way anyone expected. Threatening someone usually ended with tears, promises, maybe some roughing up to make the point clear. It didn't end with the person being threatened explaining why the threat was illogical. Finally, Giancana did something nobody expected. He laughed. Not a big laugh, just a small chuckle. But it was real. "You got some balls, Dean," he said. "I got some experience," Dean replied, "and a pretty good sense of when to worry and when not to." Giancana nodded slowly. "All right, you can go. Keep doing your act. Keep making your jokes." He paused. "But Dean, maybe he's up on the leg-breaking material tomorrow night. Not because I'm threatening you, because I'm asking you, as a favor." Dean stood up. "I can do that. I got plenty of other material." He walked to the door, then paused and turned back. "Sam, you should come to the show tomorrow. Up front, let people see you laughing. That's better for your image than sitting in the back looking angry. Shows you got a sense of humor. Shows you're not some thin-skinned tough guy. Shows you're confident enough to laugh at yourself." Then Dean Martin walked out of the room, leaving Sam Giancana sitting behind his desk, staring at the empty chair, trying to figure out what the hell had just happened. The aftermath. The story of what happened in that back room spread quickly, not publicly. That would have been bad for everyone. But within the circles that mattered, within the entertainment world and the criminal underworld, people heard about it. Dean Martin had been called in by Sam Giancana. There was supposed to be a threat, maybe violence. But instead, Dean had turned it into a conversation, had stayed calm, had explained why hurting him would be illogical, and Giancana had let him walk out unchanged. For some mobsters, this looked like weakness. Giancana should have hurt Dean, should have made an example, should have shown that nobody makes jokes at his expense. But the smarter ones understood what had really happened. Dean Martin had called Giancana's bluff without even making it look like a bluff. He'd simply refused to play the fear game, and in refusing to be afraid, he'd made himself more trouble than he was worth. You could hurt someone who was afraid. Fear meant submission. Fear meant control. But what do you do with someone who isn't afraid? Someone who looks at you calmly and explains why threatening them is a bad business decision? Hurting that person just proves they were right. It proves you're irrational. It proves you let your ego override your business sense. Sam Giancana did show up to the show the next night. He sat up front. And when Dean made jokes about Chicago, about mobsters, about the business community, Giancana laughed, loudly, visibly, making sure everyone could see that he had a sense of humor, that he was confident enough to laugh at himself. It was a smart play, probably smarter than threatening Dean had been in the first place, because now Giancana looked magnanimous, looked like a good sport, looked like the kind of guy who could take a joke. And Dean, for his part, did ease up on the more pointed material, not out of fear, but out of professional courtesy, because that's how the game worked. You gave a little, you took a little, you found a balance. But what really changed was a relationship between Dean and Giancana. There was a mutual respect now. Giancana understood that Dean couldn't be bullied. Dean understood that Giancana could be reasoned with. They weren't friends. They weren't enemies. They were professionals who understood each other. Over the years, they'd crossed paths occasionally. At clubs, at parties, at events. and there was always a nod between them, an acknowledgement. Two men who'd face each other down and found an understanding. The psychology of fearlessness. What made Dean Martin different from other entertainers who dealt with the mob? It wasn't that he was braver. It wasn't that he was tougher. It was that he genuinely understood that fear doesn't protect you. Fear just makes you a target. Dean had learned this early. Growing up poor, working in rough environments, dealing with dangerous people. He'd learned that showing fear invites predation. That acting scared makes people want to scare you more. But showing calm, showing indifference, showing that you're not playing the fear game, that changes the dynamic. It's counterintuitive. When someone threatens you, every instinct says to show respect, to acknowledge their power, to submit. But Dean understood that submission just confirms their power. It encourages more threats. It establishes a hierarchy where you're always beneath them. By refusing to submit, by staying calm, by treating the threat as a business discussion rather than a life or death situation, Dean flipped the script. He made Giancana work for his fear. And when the work became too expensive, when the cost of extracting fear became higher than the benefit, Giancana backed down. This wasn't unique to Dean. Throughout history, people who successfully dealt with bullies, tyrants, and violent men often share this trait. They don't match violence with violence. They don't submit with fear. They simply refuse to acknowledge that the threat has power over them. It's a dangerous strategy. It doesn't always work. Sometimes a bully is irrational enough to hurt you just to prove they can. Sometimes your calm gets you killed. But Dean had calculated correctly. Giancana was rational. Giancana was a businessman, and businessmen make calculated decisions. Hurting Dean Martin wasn't a good business decision, so he didn't do it. Legacy. The story of Dean Martin and Sam Giancana never became as famous as some other Rat Pack stories. It didn't have the dramatic confrontation of Dean defending Sammy Davis Jr. It didn't have the public spectacle. It happened behind closed doors, and both men had reasons to keep it quiet. But within the entertainment world, it became legendary. It became the story people told about how to deal with dangerous men. Stay calm. Stay logical. Don't show fear. Don't submit. Make them understand that threatening you costs more than it's worth. Years later, when Dean Martin was older and more reflective, someone asked him about Sam Giancana, about whether he'd ever been afraid of the mob connections that surrounded the Rat Pack's Vegas years. Fear is funny, Dean said. It's like quicksand. The more you struggle, the deeper you sink. But if you stay calm, if you don't panic, you can usually find a way through. He smiled that famous Dean Martin smile. Sam Giancana was a businessman. A different kind of businessman than most, sure. But at the end of the day, he was running an operation. And operations run on logic, not emotion. If you can make the logical case for why something's a bad idea, most smart people will listen, even the scary ones. Were you scared that night? The interviewer asked. Dean thought about it. No, he said finally. I was curious. I wanted to see how it would play out. I wanted to see if my read on Giancana was right. And it was. Sam Giancana was murdered in 1975, shot in the back of his head in his own home. The FBI believed it was an internal mob hit, orchestrated because Giancana knew too much and was becoming a liability. He died the way many men in the profession die, violently, suddenly, betrayed by the world he'd helped build. Dean Martin heard about it. He didn't celebrate. He didn't mourn. He simply acknowledged it as the inevitable end to a life lived by violence. That's the thing about that world, Dean said when asked. It always ends the same way. You either die violently or you die in prison. There's no retirement plan. There's no happy ending. That's why I never want to be part of it. I just wanted to sing, make some jokes, and go home to my family. He paused. Sam Giancana understood that about me. That's why we could coexist. He knew I wasn't trying to be part of his world. I was just passing through it. The real lesson, the story of Dean Martin and Sam Giancana, isn't really about bravery. It's not about standing up to evil. It's about understanding power dynamics and refusing to play the game on someone else's terms. Giancana had all the conventional power. He had money, muscle, connections, the ability to hurt or kill anyone who crossed him. But Dean had something Giancana couldn't counter. Genuine fearlessness born not from stupidity, but from clarity. Dean understood that Giancana needed him more than he needed Giancana. The mob boss wanted legitimacy, wanted celebrity connections, wanted to be seen as more than just a killer. Hurting Dean would destroy all of that. It would confirm everything people feared about Giancana and undermine everything he was trying to build. By staying calm, by making a logical case, by refusing to be intimidated, Dean forced Giancana to confront that calculation. And when Giancana did the math, he realized Dean was right. The comedian wasn't worth the cost. This is the real power of fearlessness. Not that it makes you invincible, not that it protects you from all harm, but that it forces bullies and tyrants to justify their actions, to calculate costs, to question whether the submission they're demanding is worth the price of extracting it. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it doesn't. Dean Martin got lucky. He read Sam Giancana correctly. He bet on rationality and won. But the principle remains valuable. Fear is often the weapon bullies wield most effectively. Take away that weapon by refusing to be afraid, and suddenly they have to find another approach. And sometimes, just sometimes, they decide you're not worth the trouble. November 26, 1962. The night Sam Giancana threatened Dean Martin over a joke. The night Dean Martin responded with calm logic instead of fear. The night a comedian taught a gangster that sometimes the most terrifying response to a threat is not caring about it at all. That's not a lesson they teach in school, but it's a lesson worth learning. Power isn't always about who can hurt who. Sometimes, power is about who can stay calm when everyone else is panicking. Sometimes, power is about refusing to acknowledge that someone else has power over you. And sometimes, the best way to defeat a threat is to simply explain why making good on that threat would be a really bad idea. Then sit back, sip your apple juice, and wait for them to agree with you.